What a load of bollocks is what it says in The Sun today on pages 8 and 9. On page 10, Daniel Hannan has written a piece. We've been humiliated by Brussels and we've been made to pay for it too. It is absolutely ridiculous. I can't quite believe what's happening. In fact, with every passing moment that this show goes on, I get more and more worked up about it. The Sun says it's an EU stitch-up. It's codswallop. How's he gotten away with it? Lord Hannan, very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning to you, Mike. It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
So long, and thanks for all the fish.
It really is like that, isn't it? And it's extraordinary. I mean, I was watching the way that the Labour government was trying to manoeuvre the public's view on this, right? Because it started off yesterday with them saying, "Oh, you know, we think we're close to a deal." Then suddenly the EU leaked the fact that they'd done the fishing deal for 12 years, and then they started sort of saying, "Oh, this is our new reset. It's going to be a great new way of dealing with the European Union." And when they worked out that everybody thought that was absolutely a crock of nonsense and didn't believe it, they then sort of later in the day turned to making out that, "Oh, this is us finishing off what the Tories didn't do." Yeah. I mean, it's neither of those things, is it?
No, I mean, one way of measuring it is what were the two sides looking for going into the talks, right? The EU was looking for a British defence commitment to take up the slack where Donald Trump has left off. Yeah. They were looking for free movement for young people so they can export some of their young unemployed to the UK. Yeah. And in particular, the thing they really care about in Brussels is having cheap university places subsidized by us for their own kids, for the Eurocrats' kids, for the Nepo babies of Brussels, right? They wanted, obviously, continued access to our fish, but I would say more than any of that, they wanted to control our food standards so that we would remain a captive market, so that we wouldn't be able to import beef from Australia, Argentina, Canada, that might displace some of the EU imports that we have. They got their way on all of those things. Yeah. And what have we got in return? Well, I mean, do we count the passport e-gates thing?
We really shouldn't.
Something they could have done at any point, right? There was no technical reason. They were doing that purely vindictively. Right. Why should we reward them for taking off the table something they should never have put on it?
And for which apparently they have no jurisdiction anyway, because if the individual country decides not to give the e-gate access to us, we won't have it. But I mean, I said this yesterday, that's a bit of a shibboleth anyway, because whenever I've gone to Europe, I've been very happy to go through the non-EU gates because there's hardly anybody there. There's only British people.
I mean, I think the EU was making it difficult for individual airports that wanted to make it easier for us. Yeah. And because they introduced a new barrier that wasn't there pre-Brexit, and they chose to do that. But I mean, look, if the reason you should not have long queues at your airports is to make your airports more efficient, and that's why we have never required, passport stamps from EU nationals. We want our airports to work as quickly as and briskly as possible. Sure. I would hope that our neighbours would do the same. But if they absolutely insist on treating this as a negotiating position, then surely the deal is that we carry on with the reciprocity of our e-gates. It's not that we start making unrelated concessions in fishing and migration and money.
Of course not. And in fact, I've had plenty of messages this morning from people who are currently abroad who tell me that, when they went abroad, they got through the passport control sections, no problem at all. And as I say, I've certainly not found any delays, particularly with people because they had to stamp your passport as opposed to just looking at it. What I'd like to see, actually, genuinely, is a return to getting through places like Heathrow quicker, because you sometimes come home and you find you've got a bigger delay trying to get into your own country.
Well, that will come with technology, I'm sure. I went to Australia last year, and you do a kind of thing on your app. It takes about 5 minutes. You do your photograph, you upload a picture of your passport, and you can then, how about this? You can then arrive without taking your passport out of the bag. The face recognition does the whole.
That's good.
In a few years' time, the whole world is going to be doing that. So this row is going to look like
it is ridiculous. And also, as the Sun have pointed out this morning, all of the giveaways will only amount to something like 0.3% of growth by 2040, for heaven's sake.
I mean, the basic problem here is a psychological one.
Yeah.
Keir Starmer never accepted Brexit. He spent 3 years trying to overturn it. And deep in his soul, he feels the need to atone. He feels the need to make it up to the EU for the supposedly appalling thing that the British people did in 2016. And if that is your attitude going into talks, the other side, I mean, in a way, you can't blame them, is going to respond as Brussels had by just saying, okay, then give us your fish, give us your student, blah, 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 which is, I'm afraid, what's happened and is going to keep happening because, there's a pattern here. We saw it with the Chagos talks. Yeah. If you see the traditional understanding of the national interest as some kind of colonialist, imperialist hang-up, you're not really going to be negotiating for Britain.
No, exactly. And what's your sense about how long this has been going on? Because we spoke yesterday to plenty of people, guests and members of the public, who just said, you know, there was no great mention of any of this in the Labour manifesto. You know, there was talk of possibly improving relations with the EU, but it didn't quite go as far as this has gone. Do you think they've been having these kind of secret conversations for a while?
Yeah, if anything, actually, I think the reality of office has made them slightly row back on how far they wanted to go. They've realized that there are benefits in being able to diverge. Yeah. And they boast, for example, about having different AI rules, different gene editing rules. And of course, they've been boasting a lot about having the India and US deals, which couldn't have happened except for Brexit. So I think the penny has dropped that it wasn't as simple as they thought it was in opposition, that the only problems were because of kind of, you know, British xenophobia or Tory standoffishness. They've realized that there are gains. For me, the biggest long-term problem with this deal, worse than the fisheries, worse than paying for the privilege, is that the obstacles it will put in the way of innovation in agriculture, in energy. The more we get drawn into the EU, the more uncompetitive we become in the world. And this is why, you know, they call it dynamic alignment. There's actually nothing in the world less dynamic than the EU.
No, I was going to say. And also, it's at a particularly low ebb as well. I made this point to Steve Baker and also to Sarah Poshin there. You know, the EU has never been at a lower point in terms of its success rate, its influence in the world, its ability to try to do anything, really. I mean, we saw that with the coalition of the willing. You know, as soon as Donald Trump speaks, you know, they jump. And as soon as he tells them to sit down, they sit down. And as soon as he says, go and find some money to bolster your peacekeeping force, they go, oh, yeah, we'll do that. But we haven't really got anyone to send to Ukraine. We haven't really got much of an army. Well,
and all of that is true. And they have never been smaller as a proportion of the world economy. And that is a trend that is accelerating. So our exports to the EU had been falling for over a decade before the Brexit vote. That fall has continued. So when you get these Europhiles saying, oh, look, our exports to the EU are down. Yeah, of course they are. Our exports to the EU have been in long-term decline because the rest of the world is getting bigger and the EU is getting smaller. Yeah. And that's why we need to be where the customers are. That's why we need to be pursuing our interests with the Pacific deal, with India, with the Americas and so on, which is where the growing populations are, where the young people are, where the growing middle classes and consumers are. We don't need to be tied to the one bit of the world that is not exhibiting any economic growth.
No, exactly right. And I mean, aside from the problems we're going to now have with the freedom of movement by another name, which could result in any number of hundreds of thousands of people coming here and remaining here for as long as they possibly want to do, it looks like energy prices will go up because, as Steve Baker said, they've got their carbon sort of regulations are much worse than ours. We already saw them with their net zero summit the other week, where we're sort of aligned already with them on green targets. You know, I just don't see any part of any of this which is going to result in food getting cheaper or energy getting cheaper or anything getting cheaper.
No, I mean, those things might incidentally happen for some other reason, like there's a revolution in Venezuela or something. Yeah. But as a result of this deal, definitely not. And actually, I think what you were just talking about there, Mike, the energy deal, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, that's a really underexplored part of this surrender. The carbon border adjustment mechanism is a kind of protectionist measure that makes it expensive to import anything that is made with energy, you know, a car or whatever it is, right? And the theory is that because you've got very high costs in Europe, you are replicating those costs to stuff that you import. In practice, what happens is that kills your domestic manufacturing. Because people go to where it's cheaper to make stuff. And we already have the most expensive commercial energy in the developed world. I'm afraid this is going to make it worse.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that Starmer can stand there really with a straight face and make out that this is a great new sort of era that we're about to enter. I mean, how is he deluded, do you think? I mean, what's your personal view of him as an individual? Because I mean, we all know he's a very bad communicator. We all know that he's very robotic and all of those things. But is he genuinely as deluded as he appears to be?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've seen, as I'm sure you have, all of those very funny compilation clips of him saying one thing and then saying the opposite.
Yeah, we play them out all the time.
Right. So it's hard to know really what's going on. But I suppose one interpretation is that actually this is not him being a terrible negotiator. It's him negotiating successfully for something that happens to be at odds with what the rest of us regard as the national interest.
Yeah.
So if you're if your starting point is Brexit was a terrible mistake, okay, we can't go back on it because we promised, but what can we do to apologize for it?
Yeah.
Right? What can we do to get back in the EU's good books? How can we show them that we don't think that we're better than them? And then from that point of view, it's been a great success because we've handed everything away.
Yeah, true. But I mean, he hasn't had to work very hard at that. I mean, you know, my sort of, you know, if I had a 10-year-old son, who's now 18 actually, he could probably have done the same deal, because you just say, what do you want? You know, well, here it is. There you go. That's the end of the negotiation.
Yeah, well, I do have an 8-year-old son, and he's currently obsessed with Lord Nelson, having read Dominic Brooks' brilliant book for children on the subject.
Right.
And
well, he won't be allowed to bring that up. He won't be allowed to bring that up at school, will he?
Well, I mean, I was thinking, what was it? Nelson's prayer on the day of Waterloo. May the great God that I worship grant for my country and for the benefit of Europe in general a great victory. Right? Yeah. If Brexit succeeds, it's bad news for the Eurocrats, because other people start getting ideas.
Yes.
Other nations in their system start thinking, maybe we could also live under our own laws. Maybe we could also hire and fire the people who pass them. And that is why they are so determined, even if it costs ordinary people in Europe a higher standard of living, why they are so determined not to let Brexit succeed at any cost to their own people.
And that was exactly what was beginning to happen, particularly with Giorgia Meloni over the whole Ukraine business, when she said, well, we're not going to send any troops there. And so suddenly the European Union was sitting there going, oh, what do you mean you're not going to do what we're telling you to do? Oh, we maybe didn't have the power we thought we had. Oh, and then suddenly, you know, the Germans are going, well, we're not too sure about it either. And you suddenly have the whole coalition just collapsing in itself, and Starmer's just giving them a massive, as I say, a massive sort of helping hand.
Yeah, but he's kind of like a leftover from the ideology of the early 90s.
Yeah.
I read a brilliant piece by somebody pointing out that the hero of Bridget Jones 2 was a human rights lawyer.
Yes.
And how this would be impossible now, because that was the era when human rights lawyers were goodies. And now they're associated with, you know, helping every kind of terrorist and criminal.
Right.
And the rest of the world has moved on, right? Since Trump, that old order of elevating judges above democracy and elevating supranational codes above nation states, all of that is over, except with Starmer and Hermer and the other human rights lawyers who run the Labour Party. Britain is going to be the last country on earth still running around looking for some international court to surrender to, or some EU-type association to subordinate itself before, when the rest of the world has gone back to national interests.
Yeah, it's quite depressing. But we shall we'll press on, shall we not? Great to see you, Lord Hannan. Thank you very much indeed.
Nice to see you,
fantastic piece in The Sun today, page 10. He says this: to see how totally we have caved in, consider what ministers are trumpeting as their big victory, namely the ability to use EU passport e-gates.